When I found my dad, a 72-year-old Vietnam veteran, slumped in his wheelchair at the entrance to Whispering Pines Estates, I thought he'd had another stroke. Turns out the new HOA president had remotely deactivated his gate access because his medical equipment was an eyesore visible from the community pathway. What this power-drunk bureaucrat didn't know, I'm the senior electrical engineer who designed and maintains their entire neighborhood's power distribution system, and I've got override access to every digital gate, security camera, and electrical panel in that pristine little community. That's when I looked at my father, a man who earned 2 Purple Hearts defending this country, and said, "Dad, how would you feel about a little tactical response?" He just grinned that old soldier smile and said, "Son, some people need to be reminded what real power looks like." Have you ever experienced a moment so wildly unjust that your brain temporarily short-circuits between disbelief and fury? That was me, standing there beside my father's wheelchair in the blistering August heat of Phoenix, Arizona, staring at the sleek digital access panel that had denied him entry to his own home of 15 years. The same home he'd purchased long before the neighborhood transformed from a quiet retirement community into a manicured showcase of exclusive desert living. My dad's medical routine is precise and crucial. Vietnam left him with shrapnel near his spine, diabetes from Agent Orange exposure, and a host of other issues that require carefully timed medications and daily respiratory treatments. His house was specifically modified with backup generators, specialized electrical circuits for his medical devices, and an accessibility ramp that apparently disrupted the architectural harmony of the community. I'd been getting his increasingly frustrated calls for weeks, first about warning letters regarding his medical deliveries, cluttering the driveway, then about complaints that his portable oxygen concentrator was producing unnecessary noise pollution. But this, physically preventing a disabled veteran from accessing life-sustaining medication, this crossed into dangerous territory. Let me pause here to explain something important. When my father says someone deactivated his gate access, he's being technical. What Barbara Shelton, the newly elected HOA president with a background in luxury real estate and a collection of diamond-encrusted brooches shaped like various dog breeds, actually did was manipulate the community's electronic access protocols. She convinced the management company to reclassify my dad's property as in violation status pending compliance review, which automatically triggered gate access suspension. All because his medical equipment didn't match her vision for a resort-style living experience. I wiped sweat from my brow and examined the gate control panel more closely. I recognized the system immediately. I should, considering I'd designed the specifications for it 3 years ago when Whispering Pines upgraded their security infrastructure. As the lead electrical engineer for Southwestern Grid Solutions, I oversee power distribution design for most of the luxury communities in the region. Every electrical panel, every backup generator, every automated system in Whispering Pines ran on my blueprints. My father watched me with those patient eyes that had seen too much combat to be rattled by suburban tyranny. "You know," he said, quietly tapping his oxygen regulator, "in Nam, we had a saying, never hit a man you can't kill. Seems like Barbara hasn't figured out who she's picking a fight with." He was right. Barbara didn't just pick a fight with a disabled veteran. She picked a fight with the man who controls the infrastructure pumping climate-controlled air into her precious community center, keeping her electric gates operational and maintaining the complex surge protection system that safeguards her home's delicate smart appliances during Arizona's notorious monsoon season. I pulled out my phone and called my assistant at Southwestern Grid. "Hey, Mira, can you pull up the Whispering Pines electrical schematics and get me the emergency override codes for their gate systems? We've got a situation. The whole system she asked, clearly hearing something in my voice. Every circuit, I confirmed, watching my father's oxygen levels on his portable monitor. And Mira, flag their community for our upcoming infrastructure. Vulnerability assessment. I think they're due for a comprehensive review. As I hung up, my father reached over and gripped my wrist, the same firm grip he'd used to pull two of his platoon members to safety after their helicopter went down in 1971. "Don't just get mad, son," he said. "Get systematic." That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a simple fix. This was going to be a thorough, methodical education in what happens when someone with a clipboard and a power complex messes with the wrong family. Barbara was about to learn a very important lesson about actual power, both the electrical kind and the human kind, and I was going to enjoy teaching it to her. First things first. I needed to get my father inside his house. The override codes Mira sent allowed me to temporarily reactivate his access credentials, but this was just a band-aid on a bullet wound. The heavy wrought iron gates swung open with an elegant mechanical hum that cost the HOA members an extra $43,000 during installation because Barbara had insisted on the quiet luxury package. As we drove through, I noticed a sleek Tesla parked in the visitor's spot near the community center. Barbara's signature pearl white Model X with custom rose gold trim. Subtle as a supernova. My father's Mediterranean-style single-story home sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its desert landscaping meticulously maintained despite Barbara's complaints. The medical accessibility ramp that had become such a point of contention was hardly visible from the street, tastefully integrated into the desert rock garden my father had spent years perfecting. "They left another notice," Dad said, pointing to a bright orange envelope tucked into his doorframe as I helped him from the car to his wheelchair. The letter inside was printed on heavy cardstock with the Whispering Pines logo embossed in gold. "Dear resident," I read aloud, the formality itself an insult to a man who'd lived here for 15 years. "This notice serves as your third and final warning regarding unauthorized external modifications and visible medical equipment. The Architectural Review Committee has determined that your property is in violation of Community Aesthetic Standard 15.3b. No medical apparatus, mobility equipment or accessibility modifications shall be visible from any common area, pathway, or neighboring property." Dad snorted. Guess I should have considered becoming immortal instead of disabled. Much more aesthetically pleasing. I continued reading. "Failure to remediate these violations within 72 hours will result in a daily fine of $250 and continued suspension of community amenity access, including but not limited to gate entry privileges." The letter was signed with a flowing signature that somehow managed to look both elegant and threatening. Barbara Shelton, HOA President and Chair of Community Standards. Inside, the house was uncomfortably warm. The specialized cooling system my father needed for his respiratory condition required specific settings that had been disrupted. I immediately checked his medical station, the carefully arranged equipment, monitoring his vitals and dispensing medication on precise schedules. His backup generator had activated as designed, but someone had clearly been tampering with the external power supply. "This has Barbara written all over it," I muttered, examining the electrical panel. "She's been having the maintenance crew reduce power to your section of the neighborhood during system tests." My father eased himself into his recliner, adjusting his oxygen. "Started about 2 weeks ago. First they claimed it was routine maintenance, then rolling brownouts due to summer demand. But funny thing, nobody else on my street seems affected." I connected my laptop to the home's power monitoring system and pulled up the usage logs. Sure enough, there was a pattern of targeted power fluctuations, just enough to disrupt medical equipment, but not enough to trigger emergency protocols. Someone with knowledge of the system had been precision targeting my father's home. Barbara used to be on the City Planning Commission, Dad explained. His breathing labored from the heat and stress. She's got connections with the utility companies. Been throwing her weight around since she moved in 3 years ago. This explained how she'd managed to manipulate systems that should have been secure from such meddling. I made a few calls to colleagues at the power company while setting up portable cooling units around my father's medical equipment. The picture that emerged was infuriating. Barbara had launched a full-scale campaign against my father shortly after being elected HOA president 6 months ago. Her vision for Whispering Pines didn't include visible reminders that humans age, get sick, or need assistance. She'd targeted 3 other residents with medical needs, but my father, with his more complex setup, had become her primary focus. "She's been flying her drone over your property," I said, scrolling through violation reports she'd filed. "Taking pictures of your medical deliveries, your home health nurse visits, even your physical therapy sessions on the back patio." Dad shook his head. "Wondered what that buzzing was. Thought my tinnitus was acting up again." The drone surveillance explained how she'd documented every piece of medical equipment my father used: his portable oxygen, his wheelchair accessible, bathroom modifications visible through windows, the backup generator essential for his life-supporting devices. According to these reports, she's claiming your medical equipment constitutes commercial-grade machinery inappropriate for residential use. She's trying to classify your home as a care facility rather than a private residence. My father's face darkened. After 40 years of service to this country, I can't even live in my own home in peace. I scrolled through more documentation, each page increasing my determination. She's been building this case methodically, amending HOA bylaws with deliberately vague language about aesthetic continuity and community character, creating new rules specifically designed to target medical equipment. The most damning evidence was an email chain between Barbara and the property management company, where she explicitly stated her concerns about declining property values due to the visible presence of illness and disability in our community. My phone rang. It was Mira again. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "I've been reviewing the electrical work orders for Whispering Pines. Someone requested and received authorization for selective power management protocols on your father's street. The request cited non-standard usage patterns requiring specialized load balancing." Translation: Barbara had engineered a technical justification for messing with my father's power supply. "Who authorized it?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "The work order was approved by Regional Director Thomas Shelton," Mira replied. "Barbara's husband," I confirmed, the pieces falling into place. As I hung up, my father watched me with knowing eyes. "So what's the plan, Lieutenant?" he asked, falling back on my old military rank from years ago. I smiled, already composing a mental checklist. "First, we document everything. Then, we study the battlefield. And finally," I patted his shoulder gently, "we demonstrate what happens when you mess with a veteran's medical care and his son's power grid." The next morning, I installed hospital-grade power stabilizers and additional backup systems in my father's home while he slept. I wasn't taking any more chances with his medical equipment. After ensuring his systems were secure, I turned my attention to gathering intelligence, the first step in any strategic response. I called my closest colleague at Southwestern Grid, Raj, who oversaw all digital security protocols for our infrastructure. "I need every access log, power adjustment request, and system modification for Whispering Pines Estates from the past 6 months, I explained, keeping my voice level despite my simmering anger. "This sounds personal," Raj noted, knowing me well enough to hear the edge in my voice. "It is. They're targeting my father's medical access. I need to know exactly who authorized what and when. While waiting for Raj's data, I drove to the Whispering Pines management office. The receptionist, a young woman with a practiced smile, straightened when I placed my Southwestern Grid ID on the counter. "I'm here regarding an infrastructure vulnerability assessment," I said, using official terminology to mask my true purpose. "We've detected unusual power fluctuations in residential section 4B that could indicate system tampering." Her smile faltered. "I'll need to get Ms. Shelton for this. She handles all utility matters personally." "Perfect. I wanted to see Barbara face to face anyway." Minutes later, Barbara Shelton swept into the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. Her cream-colored pantsuit probably cost more than most people's. Monthly mortgage payments. The diamond brooch on her lapel, today shaped like a poodle, caught the fluorescent light as she extended a manicured hand. "Barbara Shelton, Community President. How can I help Southwestern Grid today?" Her smile remained fixed as she took in my work uniform, a far cry from the executives she typically dealt with. I matched her professional tone. "We're conducting a compliance audit, following reports of unauthorized power manipulations in your community, specifically targeted brownouts affecting medically vulnerable residents." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I assure you, our community follows all utility protocols to the letter. Any fluctuations would be part of the load balancing system your company installed last year." "Interesting, because according to our logs, those fluctuations only affect one residence, a residence with registered medical equipment." I let that sink in before continuing. "That would constitute a violation of Utilities Code Section 38.5. regarding discriminatory service disruption to medically vulnerable customers." For just a millisecond, Barbara's composure cracked. She hadn't expected a maintenance worker to quote regulatory code. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." She recovered smoothly. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. The community office has—" "Actually," I interrupted, "I'll need access to your management system logs and all HOA minutes discussing utility modifications for the past year." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. "Those are confidential HOA documents. You'd need proper authorization." I slid a document across the counter, the emergency inspection authorization that came with my position. "This grants me access to all utility-related documentation during a potential safety investigation. Or would you prefer I return with county inspectors and medical compliance officers?" Barbara's smile finally faltered as she realized she couldn't simply dismiss me. She reluctantly led me to their records room, maintaining her stream of excuses: community aesthetic standards, property value protection, excessive power consumption concerns. While Barbara pulled files, my phone buzzed with a text from Raj. "You're going to want to see this. They've been systematically isolating your father's power circuit for months. All authorizations signed by T. Shelton using executive override codes." I thanked Barbara for the files with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'll be in touch soon." Regarding our findings, back at my father's house, I found him sitting on his patio with another veteran, Frank Garcia, his next-door neighbor and longtime friend. Frank had also received warnings about his unsightly wheelchair ramp. "She's targeting everyone with visible disabilities," Frank confirmed, passing me a stack of violation notices. "Started with small fines, escalated to threats about property. Liens," my father nodded grimly. "Frank's daughter is a lawyer. She says Barbara's interpretations of the HOA bylaws wouldn't hold up in court, but fighting would cost thousands none of us can afford." I spread the documents across the table, adding them to my growing collection of evidence. "Court might not be necessary once we're done." That evening, I met with Raj at a diner outside the neighborhood to review what we'd found. The picture was worse than I'd imagined and provided exactly the leverage I needed. "They've been manipulating more than just your father's power," Raj explained, sliding his laptop toward me. They've accessed code-protected infrastructure settings using executive credentials that should be restricted to emergency situations. I scrolled through the logs, my engineering mind cataloging each violation. They've been selectively reducing power to certain homes during peak rate hours, then diverting that capacity to the community center and Barbara's street. Exactly, Raj confirmed. They're essentially stealing electricity from residents they don't favor and redistributing it to preferred areas. The billing system doesn't catch it because the total consumption remains consistent. This went beyond HOA overreach into potential criminal territory. Thomas Shelton had abused his position at the utility company to help his wife wage her campaign for the perfect community at the expense of vulnerable residents. There's more, Raj added, pulling up security footage from my father's street. Their maintenance team has been tampering with individual home connections during routine landscaping. Watch this. The video clearly showed a worker adjusting something at the electrical junction box while pretending to trim bushes. That's direct tampering with a registered medical residence, I said, my voice hard. We've got them. I spent the night designing a 3-phase response plan, carefully documenting every regulation violation for maximum impact. As I worked, a notification popped up on my laptop. Another gate access attempt had been denied for my father's medical delivery van. Barbara was escalating her campaign, unaware she was handing me more ammunition with every move. By morning, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on their activities and developed a systematic counterstrike that would dismantle their operations without destroying the neighborhood's essential services. Ready to proceed with Phase 1? I asked my father. Over breakfast, he gazed at me with the steady eyes of a man who'd faced worse enemies than Barbara Shelton. Son, in Vietnam we had a saying, "Decisive action wins the war. I'm ready when you are." I nodded, placing a call to the County Medical Accessibility Compliance Office. It's time for an official inspection of Whispering Pines Estates. Phase 1 began with perfect timing. At precisely 9 a.m., when Barbara was hosting her weekly Community Excellence Committee meeting at the clubhouse, 3 official vehicles pulled into Whispering Pines Estates. The lead car, a county medical compliance officer named Sandra Liu, had brought reinforcements, a utility commission inspector, and an ADA enforcement officer. I met them at the gate, which mysteriously malfunctioned twice before allowing them entry. System glitch, I explained with a straight face while using my override codes to grant them access. Happens sometimes when the power grid has been tampered with. The timing wasn't accidental. Barbara's committee meetings were legendary for their 3-hour duration and strict no-interruption policy. Her phone would be silenced, giving us uninterrupted time to conduct our official inspection. Sandra Liu was all business as she reviewed the documentation I'd provided. These selective power manipulations targeting residents with medical needs are extremely concerning, she said, flipping through the evidence. And these HOA notices specifically targeting medical equipment. I've never seen anything this blatant. The ADA officer, a former military man himself, seemed personally offended as he examined the accessibility barriers that had been deliberately created. They actually installed decorative boulders blocking the most direct wheelchair route to the community mailboxes. That's textbook discrimination. While the officials documented violations, I implemented the technical side of our response. With Raj providing remote assistance, I initiated a comprehensive system diagnostic of Whispering Pines' power infrastructure. This perfectly legitimate procedure required temporarily resetting all custom power configurations to factory defaults. For testing purposes, translation. Every special power arrangement Barbara and her husband had engineered was being systematically erased from the system, replaced with proper, equitable distribution protocols that prioritized medical needs. All community management override codes need to be reset during this process, I explained to the utility inspector, who nodded in agreement. Standard security protocol after detecting unauthorized access. This meant the Shelton's special access privileges were being revoked in real time. By the time Barbara realized what was happening, she'd be locked out of systems she'd been manipulating for months. As we worked, neighbors began to notice the official vehicles. Frank had quietly spread the word among affected residents, and several came forward to provide statements about their experiences. Mrs. Yamamoto, an 81-year-old with Parkinson's, described being fined for her medication delivery service parking in her driveway. Mr. Castillo showed documentation of increasing power instability affecting his wife's dialysis machine. Each testimony strengthened our case and added to the growing list of violations being officially documented. Around 11:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the security system I'd installed at my father's house overnight. Barbara's maintenance chief, a man named Darren, who doubled as her personal errand runner, was attempting to access my father's external power connection. Perfect. I excused myself from the inspectors and drove quickly to my father's home, arriving just as Darren was fiddling with the locked utility box. "Need some help?" I asked casually, startling him. He straightened quickly, hiding a specialized override key behind his back. "Just routine maintenance. Mrs. Shelton noticed some irregularities on this street and asked me to check the connections." "Interesting," I said, pointing to the camera I'd installed above the box, "because that looks more like tampering with a medically protected power supply, which is a federal offense when it affects life-sustaining equipment." The color drained from Darren's face. "I was just following orders. Barbara said—" "I know exactly what Barbara said," I interrupted, pulling out my phone. "And I'd love for you to repeat it for the county officials currently inspecting the neighborhood for precisely this kind of activity." Darren looked trapped between loyalty to his boss and fear of legal consequences. Self-preservation won. "She's been having me adjust power levels for months," he confessed. "Said some residents were energy hogs, taking resources from the community. I didn't know it was affecting medical equipment, I swear." I recorded his statement, adding another damning piece of evidence to our case. "You might want to cooperate with the investigators. First one to talk usually gets the best deal." By the time Barbara's meeting ended at noon, Whispering Pines Estates was swarming with official vehicles. County inspectors were photographing violations, interviewing residents, and documenting every instance of discrimination and utility manipulation. Barbara's Tesla screeched to a halt behind the growing line of official cars. She emerged, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, her phone clutched in her hand. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, marching toward the nearest inspector. "This is private property. You have no right—" "Actually, Mrs. Shelton," Sandra Liu interjected, "we have every right. We're investigating multiple violations of medical accessibility laws, utility regulations, and possibly criminal misuse of infrastructure systems." Barbara's face contorted with fury as she spotted me standing nearby. "You!" she hissed. "This is your doing." I approached calmly, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Mrs. Shelton, I'm Ryan Mitchell, Senior Electrical Engineer with Southwestern Grid Solutions. I believe you've been interfering with my father's medical power supply." The shock on her face was priceless as the connection finally registered. "Mitchell, the veteran in Lot 47 is your father?" "Yes." "The Vietnam veteran whose gate access you revoked and whose life-supporting power supply you've been tampering with?" I confirmed. "I'm also the engineer who designed this community's power infrastructure and who has documented every unauthorized modification you've made to the system." Barbara's practiced composure crumbled entirely. I was simply enforcing community standards. The HOA bylaws clearly state, "Federal law supersedes HOA bylaws," the ADA officer cut in. And federal law is very clear about discrimination against disabled individuals and veterans. As if on cue, the clubhouse lights flickered and went dark. Throughout the community, decorative fountains stopped flowing, landscape lighting shut down, and the heated pool system audibly powered down. "What's happening?" Barbara demanded, panic edging into her voice. I checked my tablet with exaggerated concern. It appears the system has detected critical tampering and initiated emergency protocols. All non-essential power is being redirected to priority medical residences while the system resets to approved configurations. "Reset it now," she commanded. I shook my head slowly. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mrs. Shelton. Only authorized personnel can modify critical infrastructure. And according to my records, your authorization has been flagged for potential misuse pending investigation." Barbara stood speechless in the middle of her darkened community paradise, finally understanding that she had picked a fight with exactly the wrong people. 3 months later, Whispering Pines has a new HOA board led by my father and other veterans. Barbara and her husband face federal charges for utility fraud and ADA violations. The community's bylaws now include special protections for residents with medical needs. Dad sits on his patio, oxygen flowing freely, watching Barbara's former mansion being sold at auction. "Know what I learned in Nam," he says, smiling. "True power isn't about control, it's about justice." He raises his coffee mug in a toast. "To knowing your enemy's weakness and your own strength. Like my father always says, sometimes the best revenge is simply enforcing the rules that already exist." Enjoyed this story of justice served? Hit subscribe for more real-life David versus Goliath victories and share your own stories in the comments below.